The turkey was already carved when I noticed the chair was empty. I remember standing at the head of my dining room table, holding the serving fork I'd had since my wife passed, the one with the wooden handle she'd picked out at a little shop in Vermont, and thinking that everything looked exactly the way it was supposed to look. The good plates were out, the candles were lit. My daughter had made her mother's green bean casserole from memory, and the smell of it filled the whole first floor the same way it always had. For a moment, I let myself believe that nothing in the world had gone wrong, or ever would. That was Thanksgiving, 14 months ago, and I was a fool. My name is Gerald. I'm 68 years old. I spent 31 years building houses in this county, framing walls, setting foundations, pouring concrete in weather that would send most men inside, and I retired with enough put away to own my home outright and live quietly without asking anyone for anything. My wife Carol passed 6 years ago. Breast cancer, caught late. After she died, the house got quiet in a way I still haven't completely gotten used to, even now. But I had my daughter Rachel, who lived 20 minutes away with her husband Marcus and their little girl Emma, and every holiday they came here, and for a few hours the house would fill back up with noise and warmth, and I could almost forget what it felt like when it emptied out again. Marcus was a financial analyst. That's what he told people. That's what Rachel told me when she first brought him home 7 years ago, a financial analyst with a firm downtown. Smart, polished, good shoes. I liked him well enough at first. He asked good questions, and he remembered what you'd said the last time you talked, which is rarer than people think. He loved my daughter, or I believed he did, and he was good with Emma, who was 8 years old last Thanksgiving and had my wife's eyes and a habit of carrying a small sketchbook everywhere she went because she wanted to be an artist. I didn't know, that Thanksgiving, that Marcus had spent the better part of the previous 2 years losing money he didn't have. I didn't know about the private account he'd opened without Rachel's name on it, or the sports betting platform he'd been using since before Emma started school, or the total figure I learned it later from the detective, which was $240,000. I didn't know any of it. I was standing at the head of my table holding my dead wife's serving fork, and I thought my family was whole. My son-in-law excused himself just after 7 o'clock. We'd finished the main course. Rachel was in the kitchen starting on the dishes, and Emma had asked to be excused early because she wanted to work on something in her sketchbook. Marcus stood up, dabbed his mouth with his napkin, and said he needed to step out to take a work call. A quick one, he said. Wouldn't be more than 10 minutes. I told him to take his time. It was a holiday, but I understood about work. I poured myself another small glass of wine and started stacking the serving dishes, and I thought nothing of it. Emma came back inside 11 minutes later. I heard the back door first, the specific sound of it, the little dragging resistance at the bottom that I'd been meaning to fix for 2 years, and then I heard her footsteps in the hallway, quick and uneven, not the careful tiptoeing of a child who thinks she's in trouble. I looked up from the table. She was standing in the doorway to the dining room with her sketchbook pressed against her chest and her face the color of the good white plates. Her mouth was open, but she wasn't making any sound, just breathing in short pulls like she'd been running, and her eyes were moving around the room the way eyes do when a person is trying to find something solid to look at. "Emma," I said. "What happened?" She crossed the room fast and got behind me, actually behind me, with her back against the wall and both hands gripping my arm. She was shaking, not pretending. I have known this child since the moment she was born, and I know the difference between a child performing fear and a child who is actually afraid, and this was the second thing. "Grandpa," she said very quietly, "I don't think we should be here." I turned my chair and looked at her straight on and told her she was safe, that I was right here, and asked her slowly to tell me what she had seen. She had gone out the back door to find Marcus because she wanted to show him a drawing she'd made of the two of them at last year's Thanksgiving. She'd been working on it for a week, she said. She thought he was on the back porch. He wasn't on the porch, but she could hear his voice coming from the side of the house near the garage, so she went around. He was on the phone. She stopped at the corner because something about his voice made her stop. She said it was the way he was talking, she said. He sounded like a different person. Not mean, exactly. Harder, faster. She didn't understand everything, but she heard my name. She heard her grandfather's name. She heard him say something about the deed and about a signature, and she heard him say not yet, and she heard him say by the end of the month it'll be done, and then she heard him say that once the property transfers there won't be anything the old man can do about it. I didn't move for a moment after she finished. I kept my voice level because she was still holding my arm and she needed me to be steady. "Did he see you?" I asked. She shook her head. "Okay," I said. "Good girl. Go find your mother in the kitchen and stay with her. Don't say anything about this yet. Can you do that for me?" She looked at me with those eyes that belonged to my wife, and she nodded once, and she went. I sat at my dining room table for 60 seconds alone. I counted them. Then I stood up and went to the closet in the front hallway where the guests left their coats, and I found Marcus's jacket, the gray one he'd worn in, and I checked the inside pocket. The documents were folded into a white envelope with the name of a law firm I didn't recognize printed in the upper left corner. I pulled them out and stood under the hallway light and read them. The top sheet was a power of attorney. My name was on it, printed clearly in the party granting section. The signature at the bottom, on the line marked Granddaughter, was not my signature. I have signed my name 40,000 times over 68 years, and I know what it looks like. This was close. It was practiced. But it was not mine. Below the power of attorney was a preliminary property transfer document for this address. This house, the house I built myself, on land I'd owned for 30 years, in which my wife and I had raised our daughter and planted the oak in the backyard that Emma liked to draw. The transfer was made out to a holding company whose name meant nothing to me. My hands were not shaking when I folded those papers back into the envelope. I want to be clear about that. I have poured concrete in February and framed roofs in July, and I have had 30 years of learning to keep steady when a situation needs it. My hands were not shaking. But something happened in my chest that I don't have a clean word for. Not anger, exactly, though anger was in there. It was more like a door closing, a quiet and permanent click. I heard the back door again. Marcus came down the hallway, brushing the cold off his sleeves, and said the call had run long. "Sorry about that, work stuff." He smiled at me. He looked completely normal. I have thought about that a great deal since then, how completely normal he looked, standing in my hallway in my house, after what he'd just said on that phone call. I handed him the envelope. I watched his face go through 3 different things in about 2 seconds. The first was confusion, because he didn't understand immediately what I was handing him. The second was recognition. The third was something I won't describe in detail except to say it was not the face I'd seen at my dinner table for 7 years. "Gerald," he said. "Don't," I said. He tried anyway. He started with a version of, "It's not what it looks like," which is what people say when it is exactly what it looks like. And then he moved to, "You don't understand the position I'm in." And then he said, "Things have been very difficult lately and I should have come to you, but I was ashamed." And through all of it, I stood in my own hallway and I said nothing. I let him talk until he ran out of words, and then I told him that I was going to call the police, and that he should sit down. He didn't sit down. He moved toward me instead, 1 step, and I want to be honest about what happened next, because I think it matters. I'm 68 years old, but I spent 31 years doing physical work, and I am not a small man. And when he moved toward me, something in my posture must have communicated that this was not a good idea, because he stopped. He stopped and he looked at me, and after a moment he sat down on the hallway bench where guests put on their shoes. I called 911 from the kitchen phone. I spoke quietly because Rachel was in the other room and Emma was with her, and I was not ready to handle both things at once. I told the dispatcher my address, and I told her there was a man in my home who had forged legal documents in an attempt to fraudulently transfer my property, and that I needed officers to respond. She asked if I was in immediate danger. I said I didn't believe so, but I would stay on the line. Then I walked to the doorway of the kitchen. Rachel was drying a dish. Emma was sitting at the small kitchen table with her sketchbook open, not drawing, just watching her mother the way children watch when they know something is wrong but don't know what. They both looked up when I appeared. I told Rachel there was something she needed to know. I told her gently, because she is my daughter and I love her. And I told her as plainly as I could because she deserved the plain truth. I watched her face while I told her. She set down the dish and the towel and she stood very still, and I could see her working through it the way a person works through information that restructures everything they thought was true. She started to say she didn't know. She said it twice and then a third time, and I believe her. I believed her then, and I believe her now. There are things I know about my daughter that I would put my life on, and not knowing about this is one of them. She wasn't protecting him. She was standing in my kitchen, finding out that the man she'd been married to for 7 years had been gambling away money they didn't have, and had forged her father's name on documents to steal his home and she was 37 years old, and her daughter was 8 feet away listening to every word. Emma came to stand next to me. She slipped her hand into mine and didn't say anything, and I held on to it. The officers arrived 17 minutes after my call. 2 of them, a man and a woman, both young enough that I found myself thinking briefly about the houses I'd built when they were in grade school. I met them on the porch and walked them through it concisely, the conversation my granddaughter had overheard, the documents in the coat pocket, the forged signature. I handed over the envelope. The female officer examined the papers and radioed something I didn't fully catch, and the male officer went inside to where Marcus was still sitting on the hallway bench. Marcus was taken into custody without incident. I stood on my porch and watched the patrol car pull out of my driveway, and I thought about the turkey carcass still on the kitchen counter, and the good plates that still needed washing, and the way my house had smelled when I was standing at the head of the table an hour before, believing everything was the way it was supposed to be. Rachel and Emma stayed with me that night. Emma fell asleep on the couch with the television on low and a blanket pulled up to her chin, and Rachel and I sat at the kitchen table drinking coffee we didn't need and not saying very much. She cried some. I didn't. Not that night. I've cried since, once in my truck in a parking lot, once more recently reading a letter from my attorney, but that night I sat with my daughter in my kitchen, and I felt mostly a very vast and quiet tiredness. In the weeks after Thanksgiving, the full shape of what Marcus had been doing came together the way these things do, slowly, and then all at once. The gambling debts were real, and they were substantial. $240,000 over 4 years, accumulated through an online betting account that Rachel never knew existed, supplemented by a second credit card in her name that she'd also never seen. The debt had been called in by someone Marcus had borrowed from privately, not a bank. The kind of person you don't borrow from and then miss payments, and the timeline on the forged power of attorney lined up almost exactly with when that private creditor had given him a final deadline. His plan, as reconstructed by the detective assigned to the case, was to transfer the property to the holding company, which was controlled by a man he'd met through the debt, satisfy the creditor's claim against the value of the land, and present me afterward with what he assumed would be a fait accompli. He had calculated, apparently, that I wouldn't pursue it legally because of Rachel and Emma. He had calculated that family loyalty would protect him from consequences. He did not calculate Emma. He did not calculate that an 8-year-old who loved her grandfather would go looking for him to show him a drawing, and would stop at a corner because something in a voice told her to stop, and would hold on to what she heard until she could get back inside and find the one person she trusted most to know what to do with it. The charges were filed 3 weeks after Thanksgiving. Forgery of a legal instrument, fraud, identity theft under state statute. His attorney entered a not guilty plea, which lasted until the prosecution presented the handwriting analysis, at which point the plea changed. Marcus entered a guilty plea to reduce charges in exchange for cooperation and received 2 years of supervised probation, a fine, and a permanent record. Rachel filed for divorce in January. She and Emma are living in a rental house on the other side of town while the legal proceedings wind down. Emma comes here every Saturday. We sit at the kitchen table and she draws and I have my coffee, and we don't talk about Marcus much, because she doesn't bring him up and I don't push. Children process things at their own pace, and Emma has always known her own pace better than most adults I've met. She showed me the drawing last month, the one she'd gone outside to show Marcus on Thanksgiving, the one she'd been working on for a week. She'd kept it all this time in the back of her sketchbook. It's a Thanksgiving table drawn in pencil with colored pencil over it, and at the head of the table there's an older man who I recognize despite the fact that the drawing gives him more hair than I currently have. Sitting beside him is a small girl with a sketchbook in her lap. It's the 2 of us. Just the 2 of us at the whole long table, and she's drawn the candles burning and the plates out and above the table. In her careful 8-year-old handwriting, she wrote, "My favorite Thanksgiving. I have it on my refrigerator. I look at it every morning. I've thought a lot about what would have happened if Emma had been even a little more hesitant. If she'd talked herself out of it on the walk back inside. If she'd decided it was a grown-up thing she wasn't supposed to have heard and buried it the way children sometimes bury things to keep peace. The papers in that envelope would have moved forward. The signature would have stood, and by the time I understood what had happened, my home of 30 years would have belonged to a holding company with no traceable human face, and $240,000 of debt that was never mine would have been settled on my back without my knowledge or my consent. That's what Marcus counted on. Silence. The particular silence of people who love each other enough to look away. Emma didn't look away. I have spent 68 years believing that the people who love you will protect you, and I still believe that. But I learned something on Thanksgiving that I didn't know before, which is that sometimes the protection comes from the smallest person in the room, and it comes because they haven't yet learned to be quiet about the things that frighten them. My granddaughter was afraid, and she came straight to me. She didn't weigh it or measure it or decide whether it was her business. She came straight to me, and she held my arm, and she told me exactly what she had heard. If you have someone like that in your life, someone who will come to you shaking rather than stay quiet, hold on to them. Pay attention when they're scared. Children read the truth of a situation faster and cleaner than any adult I've ever known, because they don't have enough history yet to be fooled by how familiar something looks. I almost lost this house. The house I built, on land my wife and I chose together, where my daughter grew up, and where my granddaughter draws at my kitchen table every Saturday morning. I almost lost it to a man I let sit at my Thanksgiving table for 7 years, who smiled at me and remembered what I'd said the last time we talked, who turned out to be somebody I'd never actually met at all. The house is still mine. The land is still mine. The oak tree in the backyard is still there, and Emma still draws it from the kitchen window on the mornings when the light comes in at the right angle and the branches make long shadows across the grass. And on my refrigerator, held up by the magnet Carol bought at a shop in Vermont, is a picture of a grandfather and his granddaughter sitting together at a long Thanksgiving table with the candles burning. My favorite one too, sweetheart. My favorite one too.